What's going on, everybody? Cleopus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be revisiting the Samsung Galaxy A03s and going over whether or not it's still a good phone to buy in 2023. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. Now, so far in 2023, as of the recording of this video, this could change by the time you're watching this, but as of right now, the Samsung Galaxy A03s doesn't exactly have a successor in the US. Sure, the Samsung Galaxy A04s, which I have covered on the channel, is technically out, but again, that phone is not officially launched in the US. So if you're looking to get something through a US carrier, for example, excluding the deals where you can get things for free, because I know stuff like the A14 5G and the A23 5G all have some crazy deals these days. But aside from that, as of right now, the A03s is pretty much Samsung's most affordable phone. Despite this though, we are getting a pretty good display here. With this phone, we're getting a 6.5-inch PLS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So while these specs are honestly more or less pretty generic for a phone like this, I want to say in this price range, almost every other phone has the exact same kind of display. This really isn't a bad thing, because at 6.5 inches, it is definitely a decent size if you're going to be on your phone a good amount doing stuff like web browsing, social media, and even watching videos every now and then. You are going to get a pretty good experience here. The 20:9 aspect ratio is going to give you a nice immersive experience in landscape mode. And if you're doing stuff like browsing the web, scrolling through social media, stuff like that, with a taller and more narrow form factor like this, you can definitely fit a decent amount of content on the screen without having to scroll too much. And aside from the size and dimensions, the image quality is actually pretty good too. Despite only having a 720p resolution, things do still look decently sharp and clear. And one thing about the image quality I am particularly impressed by is that the colors and brightness in general are actually really good for what it is. Sure, if you're outside in the sun or maybe in a super bright room or something like that, you are still going to have a bit of trouble seeing it, but in most normal settings, this display is still going to look really nice. So on one hand, yeah, sure, it's not a really fancy high-end display with an AMOLED or anything like that, but in this price range, you can really only expect so much. So for what it is, I do think the display we're getting here is actually really good. For storage, on the other hand, it's kind of a different story. With the Samsung Galaxy A03s, we're getting 32GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion. And while I'm glad we at least have microSD card expansion, like pretty much every other Android phone, as far as the actual internal storage goes, with this phone, I feel like it's just really not enough. At this point in 2023, with stuff like apps, the system, and just files in general getting larger and larger, I feel like at this point, every phone should have at least 64GB. But unfortunately, with these more low-end phones, that's still really not the case. That being said, of course, to be fair, this is nothing new. I mean, pretty much every phone in this price range, even newer phones like the Motorola Moto G Play 2023, for example, are still gonna have barely any storage in this price range. That's really just how it currently works with more entry-level devices. And at the end of the day, this phone is really not meant for super heavy use anyway. So I guess I kind of get it. But in general, if you are looking for a more affordable basic device, but you still want to have a good amount of apps, or maybe you just don't want to ever have to worry about storage, then you're probably going to want to look for something else, because even in this price range, while it's not really that common, there are still a few phones out there that do have more storage than this. So it's definitely something to think about. Now, to give you a better idea of what this actually looks like, right now I really don't have a whole lot on my phone. I mean, just a couple social media apps, streaming platforms, search engine type things, Amazon, a couple games, and that's really pretty much it. But as you can see, despite this, there's really not a whole lot of space left, and I will say, I'm really not the biggest power user out there. I don't typically have a bunch of apps or anything like that, so I can imagine if I barely have enough storage, I feel like for a lot of people out there who use a lot more apps than I do, you're definitely going to want to get something with quite a bit more than this. For security features, with the Samsung Galaxy A03s, we got a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key, and this phone does have Face Unlock too, so definitely nice to get both options. But real quick, let's give the fingerprint scanner a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, with the Samsung Galaxy A03s, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 13 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, as far as features go, the camera setup is decent here. It would have been nice to have an ultra wide camera, but in this price range, I feel like half of them do, half of them don't. So overall, again, the features are at least decent, especially if you're just taking regular photos and you don't really care about special features like the ultra wide camera and macro camera and all that. In that case, I do think this phone will be just fine. And that brings me to the photo quality. With this phone, it's definitely not bad. In fact, for an entry-level phone, I do think this phone actually does take some pretty good pictures. Sure, of course, if the camera is really your main focus, then you're obviously going to want to get something a bit higher end that has a better camera in general. But for the average user, for more casual use, if you're taking pictures for your own memories, maybe something like Snapchat where the quality doesn't really matter too much, and even the occasional Instagram photo every now and then, no matter what you're doing. Although this phone is obviously not going to have the best camera ever, I do think for what it is, the quality is definitely going to be good enough. Now to give you an idea of what it can do, here's some pictures taken with the Samsung Galaxy A03s. And again, I will say, for what it is, I do think this phone can take some really good photos, despite again not being super high quality professional studio level photos. No one's really going to look at these and instantly assume it was taken with a bad camera. That's just not going to happen. So again, if you are taking photos for like Instagram, for example, things are going to come out perfectly fine. Now for the RAM and processor, with the Samsung Galaxy A03s, this phone has 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio P35 processor. Overall, the performance is, while not being amazing or anything, still actually pretty good for what it is. For more basic activities like web browsing, light social media use, streaming videos every now and then, and maybe some light mobile gaming, for that kind of stuff, this phone will get the job done. And I want to say, compared to most other phones in this price range, the performance we get with this phone is going to be a little bit faster and smoother. And again, for more basic activities, for a lower end device like this, you will get a pretty good experience. Now, of course, if you're doing more demanding activities, or you're just going to be on your phone all the time, then yeah, you're probably going to want something faster. But again, for more basic activities, I really don't think you're going to have any problems. Now, I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 5, and here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone, and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of where this phone stands for you performance-wise. In general, for a lot of people, it's probably not going to be a huge upgrade or anything, but if you are really just looking for something basic that works, then overall, again, you're probably going to get a pretty decent experience here. Now, the Samsung Galaxy A03s has a 5000 mAh battery that supports 15 watt fast charging, so definitely a great battery here. With the fast charging, I feel like 15 watt fast charging isn't really actually fast charging. I mean, it technically is, but it's not really that crazy. But despite this, with this phone, the charging speeds are at least decent, so most people are probably going to be perfectly fine. And then of course, with a 5000 mAh battery, in the US at least, this is pretty much the largest battery you can get. So if you're maybe not always around a charger, but you still have to use your phone a lot, so you need something that's really going to last all day. In that case, the Samsung Galaxy A03s is going to be a great choice. In addition to this, aside from the battery life per charge, down the road as the battery degrades, with such a large battery, it's still going to last for quite a while. So if you like to get one phone and keep it for a while without having to replace it, then a phone like this that has a really large battery is going to be a great choice for that too. As far as the software goes, despite originally having Android 11 when it first came out, the Samsung Galaxy A03s currently does have Android 13, so that just goes to show Samsung really does have some great software support. And for that matter, aside from currently having Android 13, with this phone, you can also expect a couple other major updates in the future. So if you are looking for a more affordable device, but you still do care about the software, then you're definitely not going to go wrong with the Samsung. Now, another thing I do want to point out here is that unfortunately, the Samsung Galaxy A03s does not have NFC. So if you like to make contactless mobile payments using Tap and Pay, keep in mind, you're not going to be able to do that with this phone. Now, this is really not surprising because even at this point in 2023, there are really only a couple newer phones that have NFC in this price range. And back when this phone originally came out, I think it was in like 2021, there were definitely no entry-level phones that had NFC, but at the same time at this point, with contactless mobile payment services becoming more and more popular and widely used, that of course means more and more people are going to be expecting that feature. So of course, if you currently use Tap and Pay, or you want the option to use it in the future, then you might want to consider going with a different device. Now, taking a look at the overall design, I feel like despite being a couple years old now, maybe not a couple, but getting close to it, this phone's design is actually still decently modern. Now, part of that is probably because in this price range, phones have had pretty much the same design since like 2018. But still, I do think for what it is, the A03s does look pretty good. It has some decently thin bezels, except the bottom one here. And despite having a water drop notch front-facing camera, it's really not very intrusive. So if you're watching a video in landscape mode, for example, it's not really going to be that bad. I really like the material in the back, especially with this red. Come to think of it, I don't think there's any other designs for it, but I personally like the red a lot. It has a really cool texture to it. And again, in general, definitely a nice looking phone. The materials are also pretty decent. Sure, they're not premium at all, but of course in this price range, you can only expect so much. And overall, when it comes to stuff like the materials, most people are going to be using a case anyway, so you're probably not going to notice that much. It's more about just the quality of stuff like the buttons in general, because of course, if the build quality is bad, then even with a case, the buttons might get stuck or fall apart or something like that. But just keep in mind with the Samsung Galaxy A03s, I seriously doubt that's going to happen, because with this phone, the build quality is actually pretty good. Also keep in mind it does have a headphone jack, which I guess in this price range, every single phone like this does too, but seeing as Samsung is starting to take away headphone jacks in a lot of their upper end A-series phones, it's really just a matter of time, probably a couple years before that feature goes away entirely. So a headphone jack at this point is definitely a feature you're gonna have to enjoy while you can. But in conclusion, is the Samsung Galaxy A03s still worth buying in 2023? In general, I would say definitely yes. Now again, part of this is really because when it comes to entry-level phones, not a whole lot has changed. I mean, for example, take the Motorola Moto G Play 2023. As the name suggests, that phone is pretty much a perfect example of an entry-level phone in 2023. And like you can see in my comparison between this phone and that phone, there's really not that much that's different. I mean, even though this phone is like a year and a half old, coming up on 2 years for that matter, today it's still perfectly usable. And honestly, I can't imagine what kind of new features Samsung would add that would make it better as an entry-level device. I mean, I guess more storage and an ultra-wide camera. Those are really my only two things I could think of. But other than that, I mean, the performance for what it is fine. The camera quality is fine. It has the newest version of Android. It has a great battery. The display is pretty good too. So in general, if you are looking for a more affordable entry-level device and you don't need anything crazy, you just need something to get the job done. In that case, especially considering with carrier deals, you can probably get this phone for next to nothing anyway. For what it is, the Samsung Galaxy A03s is still a great phone to buy in 2023. Now, once again, if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description where I will be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Cleepus Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.